Good morning, everybody. Hope you are all enjoying the conference so far. Was everybody here for the first panel? I think they did a fantastic job. And we're really excited to continue that conversation this morning with you. I'll just introduce myself. My name is Trina Stanford. I am a project associate with the Canadian Career Development Foundation, and I'm really excited to be here with some amazing leaders and brilliant women who are leading a new initiative. And I think just before I start that, I just want to sort of, that first panel really sort of laid the gauntlet. They're doing some amazing things. We heard from some of the biggest employers in Canada about the need for businesses, employers to respond to this labor market. And I'm excited because we're going to continue that conversation, because we heard a call to action for governments and career and employment services to get involved, and they're doing exactly that. So we're going to be talking about a new project that's happening. And this is a really innovative project that's happening, and it's starting in Nova Scotia, but we're hoping that it's going to take on the country. And the project is bringing together researchers, government, employers, and career service providers in an effort to explore how high-quality career services can best reflect the dynamic needs of Canadians and a future-forward workforce. It's really challenging for publicly funded employment services to keep pace with the speed of this labor market. I'm sure all of you as CDPs know this, as governments and people working in the system. It's really hard. But innovation is happening, and we're going to be talking about that today. There's a project that's happening, and it's an innovative project. It's new. It's a new way of thinking, and you really have to wrap your heads around, because we heard this from the first panel. The first panel is saying we need innovation, we need big ideas, and frankly, we've heard that all Cannexus long. If you've had a chance to attend some of the other panels and discussions, one thing and a thread that I've heard that's run through everything is we need bold ideas and new ideas, and so we're here to discuss those. So I am here with some of the ladies that are working on this project, and I want them to introduce themselves first, talk a little bit about the project and how you got involved and some of the thinking behind the project. We're going to start, and we'll have everybody introduce themselves, and we'll start with Tannis to my left, and she's going to go first.
Good morning, everyone. It's a delight to be here with you on this last day of Cannexus. Such a great conference and so many very, very important conversations happening. It's a real thrill to be here on this panel with my colleagues. As Trina has indicated, we have begun an initiative in Nova Scotia, really taking a look at where can public employment services go in this call to action in terms of attending to the needs of both individuals and employers. Nova Scotia is advanced across Canada in terms of their innovation in really wanting to push the public employment service to work with all people and all employers who need access and support. So it's a real thrill to be working so closely with government officials as we try to tease out in an action research kind of way what's possible, what are the things that we can do together to actually lean in and understand how to bring together individuals and employers within an employment service that's going to actually bring together the needs of the labor market. My role in this project is I am one of the lead researchers. I'm working closely with my colleague Serena Hopkins from CCDF, and we find ourselves living part of our lives together in an apartment in Nova Scotia as we embed ourselves as researchers and designers in this project with our colleagues in Nova Scotia. It's been an absolute honor and thrill for me to be able to do this work. I've been in the sector for 30 years. For 25 years, I operated a career service agency, and in the last 5 years, after completing my PhD, I'm focused much more on systems consulting, training, and really advancing the sector in terms of where we need to go for the next wave of services. So it's a pleasure to be here today, and we really look forward to digging into this conversation, and I'll pass it over to my colleague, Kimberly. or Amie.
We'll start over here. I'm going to tell a little story as part of my intro. I'm Amie Haughn. I'm the director of a division called Employment Nova Scotia of the provincial government under the Department of Labour, Skills and Immigration. And we have the responsibility for the public employment services system in Nova Scotia that Tannis was speaking about. Just a little bit of history is needed to look at where we're going forward. So I just want to share a little bit about Nova Scotia's story, that in 2015, there was a major change initiative to refocus the service and restructure the services in Nova Scotia. And what that did was then enable us to have what we have today to build on today. Since that time, the system, the service providers, a Center for Innovation, and career development, training and support through the Nova Scotia Career Development Agency have worked together to transform services over time. So 6 years of innovating together once that restructure and refocus was set in place. And so what that means is that a lot has changed since 2015, a lot. And the case for change and the labor market in Nova Scotia has changed quite a bit since then. But we're able to evolve very iteratively and quickly into new spaces and new services as they're needed. Part of the transformation of that time was to include employer services in 2015. And we took that journey together as service providers and as government about what that would mean, what that would look like, and it's continuing to evolve. And that's where this project starts to come into play. We think now's the time to go a little deeper and innovate in that space as well. So that's a little history so that you can appreciate the space we're in today, the foundations that have been set to do this work, and the new that we're hoping for from this initiative.
Do I have to press the button? I don't. Hi, good morning, everybody. My name is Kimberly Whit. I'm the Director of Workplace Initiatives within the same department as Amie Haughn. So I'm with the Department of Labour, Skills and Immigration in the province of Nova Scotia. So Workplace Initiatives as a division is the key division within our department that partners with sectors and employers and supports them to build a skilled and productive workforce, but also find the workforce that they need so that they can grow. And so we've been connected to the creation of what we would call a new employer engagement specialist role that now exists within Career Services in Nova Scotia. And that role, of course, was designed to support employers in the area of recruitment and retention. We very much work alongside our other partners that serve employers within government and external to government, so Immigration and Population Growth, Nova Scotia Apprenticeship Agency, and others. And we also have a strong relationship with the 14 industry sector councils in our province. So we core fund them to provide services to employers in the area of HR support, attraction, recruitment, retention, and training. So at the time, initially, when we embedded some of the employer services into the system, it really was a brand new role. We knew we needed more support regionally across the province. Employers were saying that, they were having difficulty in recruiting. They needed to change the ways that they did business. But most of the employers in our province are really small. So needing access to HR support was huge. And the role has since had a huge impact. And now as we move forward and here in 2023, we know we need to continue to evolve the work and evolve the role. So I'm here to ensure that the employer perspective is represented, as well as ensure that the appropriate employer-serving partners are engaged in the project as well.
Trina, I'd like to just also say hello to the Nova Scotia service providers that are here. I mean, this is a unique opportunity. We're not always all in the same room. There's another colleague here today as well that we want to point out to you in case you want to speak to any of us or him. That's Ernie Chan. He's over to our left. He's a project manager that works in government on the service development, continued development. So he is full of a source past this panel of lots of information. And welcome Nova Scotia service providers, CEI and NSCDA. We're glad to see you.
Thanks, Amie. Hi, Ernie. Anybody from Nova Scotia? Any Nova Scotia service providers here want to give a little shout out? Woohoo! You guys are leading the way. So this is really interesting. It sounds as though, and this is how you're setting it up, this is a dual client approach, where you're looking at clients as traditionally what we've looked at in career and employment services as individuals looking to be connected to the labor market, but also looking at employers as clients. And that's a really interesting concept. Tannis, maybe you can give us a little bit more about the research and the thinking that's gone behind that concept.
Great, yes. Mic's on, yes? Great. Yes, very much we're talking about this from a dual client perspective, and that's been the language that you actually introduced back in 2016 with your service change, and it's really given us an opportunity to start to think about what does it mean when we think about serving employers in the public employment service. It's a conversation that's happening across Canada. It's not unique in conversation to Nova Scotia, but what is unique is this partnership that we've been able to create to really explore this. So this project that we're initiating in Nova Scotia is in partnership between the Department of Economic Development and Learning Skills and Immigration. So we're really taking a look at where are all the pieces of this puzzle that bring employers together and bring individuals together. So it's a conversation that we're having amongst ourselves as researchers, Trina and I with our colleagues here. We're engaging with the service provider community, we're engaging with government departments, the sector councils to get a really strong understanding of the ecosystem of what it is for the employers in Nova Scotia, what it is that they need to be able to have the supports that they need for recruiting and for retention. One of the things that we've been thinking about as we've been processing this is essentially the parallelism of serving individuals and serving employers. So for most of us that have worked in and around the public employment system, we're familiar with employability dimensions. We're familiar with the process of conducting assessments with individuals, being able to understand where their strengths are, being able to understand where they might have some developmental areas that are going to allow them to move forward in their careers and with tremendous success. As we move over to the working with the employers, we really don't have models nationally or internationally for how to actually engage with employers so that we're zippering together employers and individuals to create a strong labor market. And so a lot of the work that we're doing right now is really trying to understand deeply what it is that employers are encountering as they're struggling with their recruitment, their onboarding, and their retention. So everyone in the room, and pretty much anybody in this sector in Canada, will be able to say, yes, employers are saying they're struggling with these things. And part of what we're doing with this initiative is really trying to go deeper, conduct interviews with employers to understand deeply where the challenges lie. And as Kimberly alluded to, in our space in Nova Scotia, we're working with small businesses. We're working with, organizations that are, scrambling to try to get employees to keep their businesses alive, to keep their communities alive and functioning. And so what are those things that these small employers need to really be able to lean in and attract a workforce and build a community-based workforce? So part of what we're hoping to do with this initiative in understanding these things is actually build a framework to understand what our employers' needs. Just as we have a framework on the individual side, that we understand employability dimensions, we see that there's a need to really understand what it is that employers are experiencing so that we're able to conduct an effective assessment with them and begin to think about what the interventions and what the supports are that could actually strengthen the labor market exchange in a community and in a province and then ultimately in Canada. So as we're doing this work in a very deep and intimate way in Nova Scotia, we literally are in communication almost every day. And that's while they're still running their departments, along with running this research project with us. So we're deeply embedded in the Nova Scotia context right now, because part of the decision in this research was to work within the system. Sometimes we try to do these kinds of initiatives in sandboxes or outside of systems, and that gives us some indications of possibilities. But in this instance, the research team all involved in this said, no, let's work within the system system and see what happens when we push that system and we try to disentangle things from that system, with the goal being that this initiative exists to transform public employment services in Canada. So everything that we do in Nova Scotia, we also do a test to say, does this ladder up? Is this something that if we try it here and we explore here, that we could imagine it moving into relevance for a pan-Canadian system? So it's an incredibly exciting opportunity. We're going where no one's gone before, and we continue to be in a state of wonder as we work with the employers, service providers, and the community to understand what are the possibilities and what can we possibly do as we start to think of a dual client model.
Excellent. It's fantastic. Kimberly, maybe you can expand on this and talk about, because when you talk about, and we heard this in the first panel, they talked about where is that line for public funding of support for employers, right? But really what we're talking about is having this funding and how it's going to help job seekers, workers, employers. Maybe you can expand on that, Kimberly.
Sure. So maybe I can talk a little bit about the impact we've been having so far. So if we were to go back to 2015, labor market context, aging demographic, alongside other Atlantic provinces, not a whole lot of youth coming up behind, employers really starting to feel the labor crunch, the labor pressure, the need for skills. So with the introduction of that new employment engagement specialist role within the Nova Scotia work centers across the province, we started to notice real opportunity in terms of the ability to not only serve job seekers and those looking for new opportunity, but also to serve employers. Now, like never before, those Nova Scotia work centers are seeing the perspective of employers, but they're also in a position of influence to help employers understand the struggle of the job seeker. What are some of the impacting factors in their lives with respect to things like rate of pay, transportation and housing issues, the need for benefits to support their families. And so, huge opportunity in terms of that dual client model to serve job seekers and those looking for opportunity in Nova Scotia. So now, fast forward to 2023 and thinking about our need to go deeper with the service. And of course, we're learning so much from those involved in the space. Nova Scotia Work Centers have been doing a fantastic job in reporting back to us what they're seeing in terms of employers asking for additional support and services, and that really indicating to us that the context has changed quite a bit since 2015. So now what we're seeing is even further labor shortages. Every sector in the province is experiencing a shortage or a skill shortage of some kind. We're seeing an increase in immigration numbers, which is also putting some pressure on infrastructure within the province. So we're seeing pressures in housing, pressures on the need for transportation, particularly in rural communities. So the issues are complex, and the problems that employers are facing in the province are complex. And they're bringing these concerns and needs into the doors of Nova Scotia Work Centers. So it really has us understanding and appreciating the fact that, maybe there's more that we can be doing to elevate the conversation with employers. They're also talking about their need for things like support in the areas of inclusion, diversity, equity, and accessibility. They're wanting access to more training, more tools, more resources. So how can we lean in a little bit deeper into meeting those needs of employers? And we believe that there's huge and tremendous opportunity in this dual client model.
Amazing. Now, when I hear this on the surface, and just a bit about my background, I've been with CCDF for about a year, but before that I worked for 14 years as a case manager, employment counselor, frontline service provider in one of the local Employment Ontario centers. We have any Employment Ontario folks here? Anybody? Not really? Woohoo! They're tired. So this idea of working with employers, we've had this concept, and I'm sure this concept's been around within career and employment services, whether it was our classic job developers or of late here in Ontario, working with employers to secure training for their employees through the Canada-Ontario job grants. So the idea of working with employers has kind of always been around, but this seems new and innovative. Maybe, Amie, you can tell us about what's different about this approach.
Sure. Centers or employment services have always had some roles that intersect with an employer, but the effort in Nova Scotia in 15-16 was to have a role that would be, as Kim mentioned, focused on recruitment and retention and employer as the first client in that scenario. And so I think that's the interest that everyone has at this moment is, and us as well as a jurisdiction, how can we bring the resources together within those employment services center in new or different ways to serve the employer and their needs at this moment and work that magic together? And as Tannis said, that will be magic we work together, looking at what centers feel should be done and can be done and what they're doing. We have a systems approach to management of services in the province where we standardize services, and then each of our employment service providers provide those services thinking about their own community and the needs that are there, and we know there's innovations in those spaces because of it, so we'd like to uncover those things. So we have in Nova Scotia, we need to change a little bit, and this initiative will help us do that. And I say that to our service providers in the room, a little bit, not a lot, because we have the foundation there to do this work. So we're hoping that working with the Future Skills Center and Tannis and Serena, we can work in that space together and come up with new solutions and go a little deeper, as Kim said. So that's some of the important work. And seeing how those in the center, how you can think differently about how you're working with an employer and how those roles that we've traditionally had and can work to support the employer needs of today. And we do know that the labor market conditions are forcing us to do this work to some degree. This is in response to what we're seeing. So we have that exciting task of, like Kim said, having some tough conversations with employers that maybe we're not yet ready in our services to do. And so we want to prepare to do that. How can we help hold a mirror up with employers and have some tough discussions about some things that typically they may have been unwilling to or didn't need to when there were no labor shortages? We don't need to think about our pay. It's the buyer's market. We don't need to think about our diversity. I don't have problems getting people. What does it matter? And so that has shifted, and this is the opportunity now, and we're quite excited to work with our service providers in this space of this work to see what's possible and how we can transform that employer focus even a little bit further.
And Kim, maybe you can talk about some of the, along with immigration, some of the other work that's been done with employers and what you see as how this is moving forward.
So this initiative really also aims to better understand the ecosystem and what other services are being provided to support employers in this space. And so this initiative really, I think, can contribute toward better collaboration between system partners. So right now, for example, in Nova Scotia, we've got even just within the Nova Scotia government, we have immigration and population growth that are supporting the recruitment of new Nova Scotians to jobs that are in demand in the province. We've got the Nova Scotia Apprenticeship Agency, who's also supporting employers in the area of recruitment. We have our economic development partners that are also out there working with employers, oftentimes the same employers in this space. So we're really hoping that, this initiative can help us to better understand the ecosystem and how we can be working better together. Because the partners also span much further outside of government. We have a lot of external partners in this space as well. So it's important that we're all working together and working collaboratively and working to identify gaps and where we could be filling in those gaps with services, which ultimately will mean better collaboration, better services to employers in the province.
Tannis, this sounds like it's a real intersection between the public employment services and employers. And maybe speak a little bit about how you see, as the researcher here, how this is going to be moving forward and how maybe some of the dynamics that you can see that might be a little bit different that has been happening before.
Well, I think as we're engaging in this initiative, we're really seeing sort of a shift in public employment services to recognize that we have to serve supply and demand. For the longest time in our services, we really have been focused on individuals and helping them link to the labor market. And as we've alluded to, there's always been some roles within the public employment service to help some of those folks further away from the labor force, reach into the labor force. But now we're actually starting to take lessons learned from those experiences to say, how do we actually systemically look at providing services to individuals and employers that bring them together? So if we think about a job seeker, a job seeker is looking for work, an employer is looking for people. A job seeker obtains work and integrates into a workforce, and an employer creates onboarding programs to support that individual to come in. We've got individuals who want to have successful careers, be satisfied in their jobs, make sufficient earnings to take care of their family, feel confident and secure in their work. And we have employers who are trying to figure out, how do I retain my workforce? What do I need to do to engage and have people stay with me to grow my business and to be successful? So there really is a parallelism when we look at the notion of supply and demand and trying to think about what are the nature of services that can bring those two pieces closer together so that we're not working on the components of the project or the components of the system as if they're separate silos, but that they're solutions that come together. And that's, I think, where we're starting to get very excited. We're still in early days in this research. We're just going out to the field shortly to do some deeper interviews with employers to get a deeper understanding. Was it only 2 weeks ago that we met with service providers in Nova Scotia? Some of you I see in the room, that Serena and I worked with the service providers to begin to get consultation and information and insights on the things that they're encountering with individuals and employers. So we really are hoping that through this, we will come up with a model that actually says, in today's world and in the moment in time that we're in this disruptive labor force, here's some new ways to think about how we can lean in on public employment services to bring services and interventions that connect these two sides of the equation. And I think building on what Amie said, it's a really interesting opportunity to think about how we as CDPs can lean in on our work with employers. How are we going to gain the capacity and skills to know how to interact with employers, to ask the hard questions that we could then help them think about how they're attracting workers, how they're engaging workers. One of the things, as we've been thinking this through, one of the metaphors I often use is I think about this work now a little bit like an algebraic equation, that what we do on one side of the house, what we do on the individual side, we need to be doing that same calculation on the other side with our employers and trying to figure out what this new formula looks like when we bring these things together. And another a theme that I often talk about when I think about working with employers in this context is I think about my days, a day I spent in Lunenburg, which was amazing. My daughter was actually with me, and we walked the streets and loved the beautiful town. And as I was walking, I saw so many job recruitment signs. Every store had somebody they were seeking. 2 coffee shops beside each other. And I thought about these 2 coffee shops. And if there are 2 coffee shops looking for workers, but there's only 1 worker, how is that worker going to decide which coffee shop they're going to work for? And I think that's the level that we need to be thinking about working with employers. Do you say good morning to your employees? Do you offer them coffee when they get to your coffee shop? Do you ask them how their child is doing because you knew that they were sick last night? How are you engaging with your workers to create welcoming workplaces, to create an inclusive environment? And it is really that stretched in terms of the workforce in Nova Scotia. And so we have these pain points that are existing for employers are also a phenomenal opportunity for us to lean in and help employers think a little bit more about their management strategies, how they're engaging with their employees. We know that most of the small and medium-sized businesses that we're talking about in Nova Scotia, but really across Canada, people start their business because they have a passion. They have a trade, they have a skill, they love books. Whatever those things are, they start their small business. Very few people start a small business to say, more than anything, I want the headache of being a manager. More than anything, I want the responsibility of forms to file and all of the things that go along with being an employer. And so we have an opportunity in this context right now, I think, to really look at how our skills and capacities as career development professionals can be of use and support on the other side of the house with employers to encourage them to get the support, get the systems in place to create healthy and welcoming workplaces. So it really is a rethinking of our role, I think, as CDPs and how we bring and zipper together both sides of the supply and demand in the services we offer.
That's exciting. That's exciting to me as somebody who used to do a little bit of job development for my clients, and it was always, you'd go in and you'd meet with the employers and you'd see things in the business and you're like, oh boy, do I really want my client working here? But having that influence and being able to, help employers, amazing. Well, all of these amazing things that we're hearing they don't come so easy, right? There's an African proverb that says, smooth seas do not make skillful sailors. So these are not smooth seas we are going through in this labor market right now. So we should all be like Captain Jack Sparrow at the end of this thing. But what are some of the challenges that you've faced? I'm sure this hasn't been easy. And how have you been working through those? And what are some of the successes that are coming out through working through those challenges? Amie, want to speak to that?
Sure. So in 2015, when we refocused and reorganized employment services in Nova Scotia, there was a lot going on in that space. We had 50 service providers that became 18 at that point in time. And so just that change alone was huge. And in the midst of all that, a menu of service was developed that would ensure that Nova Scotians all had access to equitable services of all kinds and types they needed across the province. And the addition of the dual client model happened. In addition to that, we had identified digital services coming and TBD and such. So there was a lot in this package of change. And for that reason, there were some missteps along the way when that position was rolled out and that job was rolled out. And we didn't have the time, any of us, to sit, reflect, think about it, work as a system to launch it. It was here's the resource, here's the role, everybody go, right? Everybody go. And everybody went. They did, and they did amazing. And then sometimes, though, other centers or service provider organizations floundered a bit. They weren't quite sure what the role. I mean, this is the first time where you have somebody proactively addressing business needs without that job seeker attachment maybe happening. So it was a brave space to be in, and centers did great, but we didn't have performance accountability set up for it yet. We didn't have training set up for it yet. And the message was go. So people went. And so that created some confusion, but there was also lots of good that came out of it too. So that's a lesson if you're thinking about doing this in a jurisdiction. We do have the lessons of performance accountability, clarity, spend time together, and maybe don't try to do it amongst 20 other things because you're going to lose sight of it. And where we are now, though, we have most of those things I've just said. So that has happened over the 6 years, but with a little bit more pain and struggle than probably all of us would have liked. In terms of the policy updates, like we, as I mentioned, we included those roles in the menu of service so that we would all know that they need to be delivered in the province, but what it meant and having the time to talk about it, we didn't have it as much as we would have liked. Kim had mentioned, I think, and others, that the role is on recruitment and retention, and now this space we're in right now is we still have the intention to stay with that focus and not become business development practitioners. But many of the issues that arise in this space can be about their business development. So if one of the reasons I'm losing employees is because my pay isn't so great, and I tell my employment development specialist, employer engagement specialist rather, that I can't afford to pay, who's going to unpack that question? That is probably not our services in the R&R space, as we call it. So having those linkages in the ecosystem to help that employer unpack what's going on with my pay. What's my cost of goods, and why can I not pay more? Why can I not create larger margins in my business to pay the people what I need them to pay? So you can hear, now we're in a business development conversation. So those are things that haven't been sorted, and we see the opportunity in this space to start to work on those. And the labor shortage in the, previously this role could focus on attachment, right? Bringing the supply to the demand. And with a labor shortage, I feel that a lot of us are wondering, what is that thing I can offer an employer right now in recruitment and retention? We have some tools, we have some resources, but that I may have people working in my center who I can connect to you might not exist. Those offers. A wage incentive, hiring incentive may not do anything for the employer at this point in time, and those are all our old tools. So what are we really, I think that folks are wanting to go deeper and figure out what can I really offer in the recruitment and retention space to an individual within the public employment service system, and we're looking forward to uncovering that with our service providers, because the truth of the matter is we don't know what the answer is yet.
Kimberly, maybe you can talk about some of the challenges you've seen and then how you guys have worked through those.
Sure. No question, since 2015, there's been a lot of learning. As Amie had mentioned, Nova Scotia Works providers went boldly into this new space with us and willingly stepped into wanting to support employers locally in their communities. And at that time, because it was a new role, there was a lot of learning. There was other players in the space. I had mentioned earlier, up until that time, the province had been providing core funding to 14 industry sector councils who were tasked with supporting employers in the province with support in HR, recruitment, retention, and training, and workforce planning. And so, it was really trying to understand, where do we fit in this broader context of employer support? There was also some learning in the space of understanding programs, learning about those programs, what employers were applicable for those programs, even having confidence to have conversations with employers about their recruitment challenges and needs, and feeling confident enough to have some conversations around training and referral to programs that could support them. It was a new space, and we were all learning together. And so Jen Thorne, our corporate strategist, had provided a lot of leadership during that time in identifying working with providers to identify what some of the training needs were. So we quickly identified professional development was certainly needed to support this new role, to ensure that they could lean in with more confidence. So building skills in business acumen and foundational HR skills was important. So we learned a lot through that. The Nova Scotia Career Development Association was huge in supporting us in building training and onboarding new EESs. So again, a lot of learning. In terms of successes, though, we've seen some immediate impact right away. Right away, we were seeing that employers were finding access to workers more quickly. We've seen an increase in access to programs that served employers and access to training programs in the province. So we knew right away this is going to be a role that's going to have impact and continue to have impact into the future. And of course, now, as Amie was saying, moving into 2023, we now know employers are having more complex needs just based on the conditions of the labor market. So how can we take this even further, particularly in supporting them with these complex challenges, particularly around diversity?
Excellent. I'm conscious of time, and I do want to leave a couple minutes for questions. So this sounds fantastic to me, and I'm listening to what you're doing in Nova Scotia, and there's an old saying that says, as Nova Scotia goes, so goes the world, right? Do you guys know that saying? Okay, I made it up, but it's okay. But in this context, I think it holds true. And so we have a lot of folks here who are joining us from other jurisdictions who want to know, how can this work in Alberta? How can it work in BC? So maybe we can talk about sort of the wider implications of this for Canada and how we're looking forward to maybe taking this taking the country by storm. So, Amie, maybe you can talk about the way forward for the other provinces.
Well, that is truly the intention, is the work that we're doing in Nova Scotia, because it's in partnership with Future Skills that will be in the fishbowl, in the bubble, Nova Scotia, and be able to fully explain what's happening and what has happened as we do this work together. So stay tuned for that. We'll be sharing everything, I guess, and we're happy to do that. We're pleased to do that. We do know, and the caveat though, that there's contexts in every jurisdiction that need to be considered, and that's not an out, provincial governments, as I say that. That is not an out, but it is an understanding that the research team is very aware of that, and they're looking for the best practices and the things that have been done and how that could come to you for your consideration, but there's no cookie cutter solution here in any of the work, and the team is very aware of that. So, but we do believe we need to go way deeper and stop using the words recruitment, onboarding, and retention as the conversation. So we are challenging ourselves in this space, and I say this to our service providers in the room, challenging ourselves to figure out the factors related to those elements and be prepared to start to dive into those. And we think that because of this work, we do have a few first steps that are pretty clear to us. And Tannis, I think you alluded to a bit of it around looking at those factors, unpacking them deeply. And we anticipate there might be tools that come out of this work then that would help the conversation within the recruitment and retention roles we have, and within the numerous roles that are working with employers at an employment service center to go further into some of the conversations, all informed, of course, by the practitioners themselves and the businesses, as Tannis said, right? So we're going to be looking for the users to help us decide what this is and what it does. And beyond that, we are holding a little space for the potential for a new service of some kind. We don't know what that might be or could be, and that will only be something that we leave a space for it to be emergent, honestly. We don't have that in mind at the moment, but we're kind of holding a space that we're going to hear something that makes us all think in the Nova Scotia Works Employment Services System, maybe we need to go here now. So that's a TBD and a emergent over the next year plus, I would say, as we do this work.
And Kimberly, what are your thoughts on that? How do you see this expanding?
I guess just to follow up on the framework, being able to map out the factors around recruitment and retention and use that as a tool with our partners in the ecosystem, I think can be hugely beneficial, but beneficial for any other jurisdiction. So in terms of applicability, as I had mentioned earlier, we have a lot of players right now in the space in terms of supporting employers, and for good reason. Recruitment, onboarding, retention, huge issues. All of the players bring a bit of a different perspective to the table, can sometimes offer a variety of tools, services, and supports. To have a framework to help us map out what those tools and supports look like in reference to some of those recruitment and retention factors can help us clearly see how each of the partners play a valuable role within this ecosystem, can also help us as a jurisdiction identify where we need to better collaborate and partner together to meet some of the same collective goals, and may also help us to identify some gaps. And so I really see this framework as a really great tool for Nova Scotia and see it as having great applicability for the pan-Canadian perspective.
And Tannis, you've got such deep knowledge of career and employment services all over the country. How do you see this as we look forward and the applicability to other jurisdictions?
Well, building on what Amie and Kimberly said, we're really trying to dig deep into this initiative to understand things we don't understand, to find new knowledge, to find new ways of thinking about what this service model could look like. And Serena and I are very keen in all of the work that we're doing to be very attentive to the local context, because that's where we are and we want to be incredibly sensitive, and to consistently be elevating it to our knowledge across the jurisdictions of Canada. And so I think that we're moving sort of from an approach to developing a model. and we don't know quite what that model is going to be yet. We're really in emergent stages at this point. I think we're all hoping that we're going to have a framework, as we're talking about, that helps us understand employer factors. That our hope with this research project is that, as Amie said, we're going to see some service ideas that we want to test, things we want to try. So we are hoping to do some demonstration work this spring in the field in Nova Scotia, testing some new types of services. But, I think hopefully you can get the sense as we're talking here, we're giving you all the knowledge that we have, and we are in a very emergent space and still allowing information to unfold. So we are cautiously optimistic that we will have information to share that will be relevant and could be applied within jurisdictions. We're trying very carefully to do that in such a way that we're not localizing the information to make it difficult for cross-applicability. And one other thing I'll say about this research project that I think is we hope will have influence as we continue forward as a sector, looking both at policies and practices, is we are also attending to the fact that we are in the midst of social innovation through this work. It's a really incredible opportunity to have FSC step into this space with us. We have our government colleagues, Trina and I, who have worked in the sector each for 30 years across Canada. We've got our amazing Nova Scotia Work service providers in this space. And so we are also, as we go through this, conducting a developmental evaluation to try to understand what might we learn about this, about creating social innovation. What happens when you bring this different kind of partnership together, deeply embedded together. I mean, I really swear, I feel like I've known you guys for years already, and it's been months, because we're coming into this with a very honest, open, reflective perspective. And I think we're going to learn some really interesting things about social innovation that supersedes just the changes that we're looking at for our sector. So hopefully those will give us some insights as a sector for how we can advocate for policy and practice change as we work across our ecosystem and career development.
Well, I'm excited. I think that for those of us who are outside of Nova Scotia, we are looking for that TBD. We're waiting for it, but it sounds like it's an amazing initiative, and thank you all for being a part of it and leading it. Does anybody have any questions? I think we have time for one question. Anybody stepping up to the mic? No? We did a good job then. We answered all your questions. We have a question. Yes, sir.
Hello. My name is Don Prezant. I'm with Learning Agents, CanCred Digital Credentialing. I have a lot of ideas. They're not all wonderful, but just as I was listening to this, you were talking about business development. I was thinking about employer professional development, and I was thinking about models like B Corp and employer of choice. And I'm thinking, since you're funding these employers, might it make sense to think about light forms of certification, to have like a Nova Scotia branded, this person has been developed by the province of Nova Scotia to be an Nova Scotia employer of choice? Just as I say, might not be a good idea, but just an idea.
It sounds like you're almost like a sort of a better business bureau for employers, but that they've been given the stamp of approval of the career and development sector. Is that what we're thinking of?
Actually, I asked a question yesterday about could there be better ways of doing shared onboarding? So in other words, when you send an employer there, and it's about employment, it's about retention, but it's also about development. Yeah. It's about setting up that relationship that you hope will stay with you. That might be a little piece of it. Yeah,
that's wonderful. Does anybody want to take that?
I think there's huge opportunity there. There's a number of ways I think I could tackle your comments, but I will say support to employers in terms of professional development and certification is certainly a priority for Nova Scotia. So we have a number of initiatives that support employers in that space. The Workplace Education Initiative is working with a lot of small businesses in the province to support them to build a lot of the foundational business skills that they need. As well as we have the Workplace Innovation and Productivity Skills Incentive that support employers in the province to become more productive and grow. And we also have free online learning for any Nova Scotian, including companies in the province, through Skills Online NS. But around the certification piece, One piece that we did launch this year was the Skills Online NS marketplaces for industry sector councils. So now employers from those respective sectors are able to log on for free and access programs and training directly linked to industry need. Nova Scotians through those sectors are able to log on and access that free learning as well. So we're very much committed to that. I love the idea of branding employer of choice. I think that that's something that any Nova Scotian wanting to know that they're going in perhaps to a workplace that's welcoming or seen as an employer that's doing really good things is something for us to think about. Thank you.
That's a great idea. Yes.
Elaine? Am I on? Can you hear me?
Yes.
I'm wondering how this project, and I'm watching it with such excitement, relates to the previous model of fail-to-play services for Canadians. So, you're not succeeding, so you get support, to moving toward a model where all Canadians have access to services, whether they're an employer or an employee, or I'm just wondering how this project might relate to the kind of future vision of services for all.
Sure, I'll take that. Well, the Responsive Career Pathways Initiative, which this is one of the projects is under that really is the goal for Responsive Career Pathways that we're all working towards, is really trying to reconceive what are employment services for Canadians. How do we move from a fail-first model to an inclusive model? And there are other projects within the Responsive Career Pathways portfolio that are beginning to look at how we can model career services for those that are working, for those that are looking for career development supports with employers, to be able to intervene as career development practitioners to help them set that initiative up. So I think this particular initiative here in Nova Scotia is very much looking at that holistic perspective. And Amie and her team have done an amazing job of working with the LMDA policy and really understanding from a policy literacy perspective how to stretch that, how to actually be able to set up public employment services that are accessible for all, including employers. And so, a lot of this initiative started about 1.5 years ago, and I wrote a paper with Sandra McKenzie, and that's really where we sort of coined the notion of moving from a fail-first system to an all-access and engagement system. And with Future Skills Centre's investment, we're really actually, getting to try some things that we've talked about in the sector for a very long time. And I think we're really going to be able to have, some evidence that can help to move the dial on this. And Trina and I don't go a day where we don't say to each other, how are we going to policy up? How are we going to take this and move it up the ladder? So, we're trying to stay very, very aware of the stratosphere that we're intersecting with, that this is really important work into itself, but incredibly important work for changing sort of the orientation of our sector and getting policymakers to understand that we need to move from a fail-first system for sure.
Excellent. Well, I want to thank all of our panelists for being here today and telling us about this incredible initiative, and thank all of you for joining us as well, and thank FSC for giving us this space, but also for just, their work in redefining and reimagining what career and employment services are going to look like. So that's very exciting. We are going to be, after this session concludes, we're on a networking coffee break, but we'll be back in this session, back in this room at 10:20 for our final panel, and I've heard it's very exciting. So please come back for that. And thank you all, and we'll see you in about a little bit, 20 minutes, 25 minutes. Okay? Thanks.